as communities across the globe work hard to repair the damage of COVID, how can we ensure that heritage plays a role in the rebuilding of places and communities? What do we need from government and the private sector, and how can we as heritage NGOs play our part in advocating the needs of heritage in that context? What messages do we need to send? And with many governments rushing to build their way out of the crisis, what can we do to respond to the threat of inappropriate development, a race for economic recovery which doesn't take heritage into account?
2019, we had 1.2 million tourists enter the site in that year, which was the all-time peak. And the government is very focused on tourism promotion. It is the largest private sector employer. There are many repercussions across all sorts of industries that relate to tourism and tourism income. And so it is an industry that is very protected and promoted by the government of Jordan. But for us, it has resulted in a lot of common and harmful practices within Petra that detract from the quality of the visit and site integrity.
Just before the pandemic and the lockdown, we were discussing the huge impact of the numbers. All our new programming was geared towards how to counter the increasing visitor numbers. As I mentioned earlier, we were already 1 million plus visitors, and it was having a severe effect on our visitor experience, on the site experience, the ticketing experience, and everything that one can relate to visiting a site. And it is completely the opposite now. With a 6-month lockdown, we've just opened from October 1st. It's a completely new perspective.
And cultural heritage has become what I would call a new impetus for Malaysia as a whole. In terms of what I would say the COVID impact is that it's probably, while definitely COVID has had a big impact on the what they call tourism and tourism related sectors, but I also think that the period leading up to 2020, Georgetown was already facing intense pressure as a result of the tourist boom. And the current crisis is probably has given us the breathing space to take a step back and to reassess the pathways that we want to take forward. On tourism, fundamentally, we think that it will be reshaped. People are going to go through much difficulty in traveling in the future by virtue that, then they have to go through screening and all kind of pre-travel tests and post-travel tests and so on. So if they are visiting places, they are going to look for deeper and immersive experience. And there's a need then to ensure that a lot of the what I would call tourism-related experiences of sites or places and so on focuses in terms of not quantity but rather quality of the experience.
As part of our 1.1 million number, we are largely dependent on domestic tourists. The percentage of our international tourism is very, very low. So I think it's a moment to pause and pay attention to our internal constituency and try and being relevant to them. That is the strategy, that how we interpret the site and how we interpret the fort would appeal to our domestic audience as much as it does to the international visitors. So I think local, while being local, position yourself globally is the mantra that one could follow.
Actually, this is now about the future of cities more generically. It's not just about protecting small parts of cities. It's about where do we take cities as places where millions of people in the world will live, and how do we build the heritage protection and sustainability and good living principles into future city design. So in a way that COVID, which has sort of halted so much, are we in a position where we can advocate at a time when governments want to just switch the development switch back on?
And I think now with the pandemic, obviously with the tourism downturn, we're facing two related challenges. One is that, tourism had been a fuel for some of the renovation. But secondly, our own sponsors, who are often from the local business community, are now facing huge economic problems. And so the availability of just basic money to keep heritage work going is going to be enormously difficult.
If you do not invest in cultural heritage sector, your tourism sectors will flounder or will stagnate, or what I would call, will not be unlocked its full potential. So it's important that governments look at the heritage sector as an asset and consider investing in them in a systematic manner.
When we look at cultural heritage, it really makes sense to keep it high on the agenda on so many levels. If you look at the world today, so if you're trying to build an inclusive sense of identity, you go back to your cultural heritage to do that. If you're trying to build the public space in which you can debate, you can talk, you can bring in different perspectives, differences, that can be done through cultural heritage. If you look at resilience strategies, how communities throughout history have dealt with adversity, how they have adapted, how they have changed to deal with adversity, that comes to us through that knowledge, through our cultural heritage. And it makes sense economically. As Hamdan said, it's tourism moving forward will be focused on the specifics, on the quality of the experience, on the cultural heritage of the country. So it makes perfect economic sense. And so any which way you look at it, I think you have to advocate very strongly for cultural heritage to remain at the top of the agenda and to bring in the different parties together. So you're not just talking to the governments, you're also talking to the private sector, and then you're getting support from the local communities themselves.
There's obviously a way to make the argument that tourism can be part of the economic recovery going forward, and how preservation, conservation in Yangon could be a big part of that. But I think there's a wider argument to make as well, which is that as Myanmar is trying to move from being a poor country to a middle-income country, that having a beautiful city and a livable city is a priceless asset, and that preserving and integrating our cultural heritage as part of city planning, as part of the future of the city, again, is a priceless asset for the country going forward. And I think with COVID, people are much more aware of their health. And I think, having a healthy city as well is something that people are going to think about much more in terms of air quality, in terms of walkability. We're working with the city government now in restoring pavements and improving bicycle lanes for the very first time. So I think heritage has to be placed within that overall vision. And I think the government, at the time that they're thinking about stimulus, they're thinking about economic recovery packages, the right investments made over 2021, 2022 can have incalculable kind of advantages going forward for decades ahead.
Among the people of Jodhpur, there's a saying that if they don't see the fort once in a day, their day is not complete. So that's the sort of level of emotion that people attach to heritage. And in these difficult times, when emotions are low, when there is so much of psychological pressure on people, heritage can indeed play a very important role, not in economic revival, but also on mental health and emotional health of people.
It really is all about being very nimble, not relying too much on one industry. Participation and partnerships are critical in the work that we do. And no matter how much pushback one gets in the field that we're in, there has to be a determined effort to really put cultural heritage at the top of the agenda.
You know what, you four, you're going to save the world. I've been so inspired by what you've said. We haven't at any point put heritage in a box. We've always talked about heritage as being central to people's lives, central to our vision for the future, central to livable cities. I love that from Thant, and central culturally and emotionally that you've all talked about. The pandemic in a funny kind of way has given us a little breathing space, and you've all been very articulate about the value of that, to rethink and reshape, but equally how to build public support, because at the end of the day, governments will react when the public show they care. So that's our job. Thank you.